From the Antarctic wastes to Scotland's wilds, a rare, priceless whiskey is coming home. Polar legend Ernest Shackleton's historic case of scotch has been buried in ice for 100 years. One of the world's top tasters is on a mission to sniff out its secrets and remake the vintage. Can he turn back time? What will he discover when he uncorks Shackleton's lost spirit? The most unusual cargo to survive the wastes of Antarctica is on the move. It's potentially priceless. Conservation expert Lizzie Meek from the New Zealand Antarctic Heritage Trust is the whiskey's caretaker. Only an X-ray will reveal if her remarkable find is safe.
That is fantastic. Cool is that? That is super fantastic.
Lost for 100 years, Ernest Shackleton's intact secret scotch is the whiskey find of the century. The South Pole, surrounded by nearly impenetrable ice fields. For centuries, dreams of conquering this ruthless land drive explorers to extremes. Ernest Shackleton is arguably the most inspiring of all polar explorers. Born in Ireland, educated in England, the young Shackleton announces he has a vision that one day he'll make a journey to one of the Earth's poles. Following this vision, Shackleton becomes an unrivaled leader of men. His true grit immortalized in the quote, "But when you are in a hopeless situation, when you are seeing no way out, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton." The man tasked with the enviable job of recreating the great explorer's whiskey makes his entrance at the London Whiskey Show.
Hi guys, you all right? You okay?
Richard Patterson, affectionately known as the Nose, is one of the world's best-known whiskey blenders. His opinions are sought by many, and he's never afraid to share them.
Serve over ice?
Never.
If you ever come to me and serve over ice, I'll have to kill you.
3 generations of his Scottish family are steeped in whiskey.
Go like that.
His father introduced him to the golden liquid at the delicate age of 8.
Then you go back to the whiskey.
He's a showman, a salesman, and a passionate whiskey expert.
If I see you taking whiskey and warming it, ballooning it, and then caressing it like this, what I'll do is take 2 fingers, stick it in your eyes.
Whiskey is the most complex of all spirits. There are more than 2,500 Scotch whiskey brands alone. It takes a big man with a big nose to stay on top.
This should actually be kept in your mouth for at least 3 minutes.
Shackleton's stash is creating a buzz among the whiskey crowd. There's one thing of particular interest.
And what everybody's been asking me here today is, what does it taste like? And sadly, I can't give them the answer.
Richard will soon fly to New Zealand to be united with Shackleton's whiskey. But for now, he must show his patient side.
I've been waiting for this whiskey for nearly 4.5 years.
After a stint in the Merchant Navy and an early trip to Antarctica, he's tried business, politics, and journalism. Shackleton's not at home in a suit, and in 1906, he's doing all he can to return to the ice. In the museum vaults in New Zealand, Lizzie, the current guardian of Shackleton's whiskey, tends to other relics from the golden age of polar exploration. But whatever ghosts these objects may conjure up, it was while exploring his expedition hut that Lizzie recalls sensing the spirit of Shackleton.
I'm not really a believer of ghosts, but there definitely is a strong sense of a place that was inhabited by powerful personalities, by very intense experiences. And I think the contrast is you come from outside with a huge amount of adverse weather, it's really cold, you walk into a building and you're struck by the sense of shelter that it offers. And you're instantly hit by the thought of those men living through those long, dark months. And you can smell all kinds of things. It's a very distinctive aroma, and that hits you as well. And so it's not like anything you've ever experienced, and it feels very much like walking into the past.
Shackleton's crew is filled with powerful personalities. He arranges to share a room or stay close to any potentially disruptive crew member. Never demanding a task he wouldn't do himself, he's soon known as the boss, which pleases him. Determined he will find money and a ship, in 1907, Shackleton announces his conquest of the Pole Plan to the Royal Geographic Society. They decline to back him, but that doesn't stop Shackleton. In his lab in Scotland, Master Blender Richard prepares to collect a sample of Shackleton's whiskey. He's days away from joining Lizzie and the liquor in New Zealand. What will he find? What would a blender, like Richard Patterson, but from a century ago, have prepared for the charismatic Ernest Shackleton?
The art of blending is taking many different component parts, putting them together to create a style, but more importantly, something that I must maintain the consistency of. So what I'm doing here just now is getting the grains ready, so it's not too heavy, it's not too light, and this is, you can see the richness of the color. It's got a lovely rich color. But it's very important that every step of the way I actually measure and take a percentage of all of these various whiskies that I can record and make sure I've got the right formulations.
A magic moment for all Scotch whiskey is a silence when nothing appears to be happening. It ends the distilling process as a pure, clear spirit, but by Scottish law, it must spend at least 3 years in a wooden barrel or cask. This is when distinctive colors and flavors are imparted. In a previous life, these oak casks may have been used for storing Spanish sherry or American bourbon. Time in the wood creates the whiskey's style and character.
So you can see it from this immediately. This is very dark. This is in fact a sherry cask. So we need to be very careful of how much we use. We don't want too much influence of the sherry, but we just want it to come through.
Sometimes Richard selects a single whiskey or single malt. Or he mixes as many as 30 different whiskeys to create a blend.
There's no other whiskeys on the record that have been kept like Shackleton's. That's what makes this so so important.
When it comes to discovering the secrets of Shackleton's whiskey, it's Richard's formidable nose that does the bulk of the detective work, and rightly so. His nose is insured by Lloyd's of London for $2.6 million.
Well, when I know Shackleton's, what I smell is what I should get when I come to taste it. But because it's been in the fridge for over 100 years, you need to see if that balance is still there. I would like to think it will be, but that's the mystery.
So far, everything Richard knows about Shackleton's whiskey is from this original order. In Shackleton's hand, it requests McKinley's 10-year-old from a distillery that no longer exists. It also asks for a 5% discount for cash payment. Shackleton's grandly named British Antarctic expedition sails in 1907. His ship is a small refurbished seal hunter called Nimrod. Expedition costs are covered mostly by gifts and loans. Shackleton worked his charm with the wealthy and influential to fund his Antarctic dream. Richard is off to New Zealand to collect the thawing whiskey. Conservation is a top priority, and Lizzie won't allow the bottles and their precious contents to travel unescorted. Richard will keep them locked in coolers on board during the trip back to Scotland.
Now, finally, we're on our way to Christchurch to pick up these real historic bottles. All my fellow blenders are envious of me doing this wonderful assessment of this whiskey. This is something I've never done in the 40, 50 years of my career. That's our flight. Let's go. Let's go and make history.
It's the ultimate adventure for Richard. He'll collect not only the world's rarest vintage whiskey, but the beverage of choice of his childhood hero.
Really, Shackleton is the man that I've always greatly admired. He went through absolute agony, pain, death, almost on death's door on many occasions, but yet he looked after his men.
First stop for Richard in New Zealand is the small harbor town of Lyttelton. It was the last port of call for Shackleton and the Nimrod as they prepared for the Antarctic.
It's where it all began. This is when 15 brave men got on the Nimrod and disappeared down south. Gee, I wonder what they're thinking about.
On Shackleton's mind is the loading of livestock on the already laden Nimrod. He's taking 10 horses and, unusual for a British expedition, husky dogs. The establishment thinks the dogs are unpredictable, but Shackleton wants to give them a try. 50,000 well-wishers show up to wave goodbye to the brave crew.
Well, I mean, they were going to disappear. They were going to be away for maybe 1, maybe 2 years. So why not have a send-off to remember?
The next stop for Shackleton is the cruel Antarctic. And a brutal encounter with death. The word is out. Ernest Shackleton's whiskey is on the move. TV crews gather at the museum in Christchurch, New Zealand. The still defrosting crate is carefully taken from the freezer to Lizzie Meek's specially built cool room.
Well, it's a very smooth move, I think, into the fridge there. The guys did well, and we've got to just let it settle now and spend the next few days slowly thawing out.
After almost 2,000 miles at sea, Shackleton makes landfall in McMurdo Sound, Antarctica. First task is to prepare a hut and all its contents, including 25 cases of whiskey, to be ferried a mile across the ice. Shackleton tries the dogs, but in his enthusiasm to bring them, he overlooks that no crew member has the skills to run them. After chaotic attempts, Shackleton declares them official camp pets, and they are never in harness again. The modest hut is home to 15 men. At less than half the size of a tennis court, it takes all of Shackleton's people skills to avoid conflict. One distraction is celebrations. Shackleton encourages birthdays, anniversaries, any special day is reason to celebrate. Whiskey is uncorked and music turned up. Shackleton's awareness of the need to balance work and downtime, he's ahead of its time. In the museum cool room, the bottles are free after 100 years in ice.
We're ready? Here we go. Slightly nerve-wracking, but pretty confident that it's going to go okay.
For the first time in a century, the bottles are touched by human hands.
Oh, it feels heavy. It feels very heavy indeed. I can actually feel liquid slightly moving in that bottle. That's very exciting. They're looking good. They're looking like they've lost some of their moisture content there.
The intricate straw packaging is clear of ice.
This one also feels very heavy.
In the early 1900s, straw was still used to protect breakables in transport. These simple fiber tubes cushioned the glass as the Nimrod battered around in rough seas.
Does the bottle feel?
This one's full as well, and look at that, I'm starting to see a nice bit of label on that one. These bottles are reluctant to give up their secrets easily.
Antarctica's frigid winter darkness gives way to clear, cold daylight as Shackleton prepares for his conquest. "850 miles of uncharted ice lies between Shackleton and the South Pole, a prize he describes as the last place on Earth worth striving for. Is now his for the winning. His first goal is to make it to the furthest south point that his mentor and rival, Captain Scott, achieved. Shackleton powers ahead and makes it in a month, half the time it took Scott. But at the expense of his horses. Ill-equipped for this alien world, their sweat freezes and they sink at every step. Soon, all the horses are lame or terminally sick. Shackleton orders that they be put out of their misery and buried in the snow. Only 3 men are traveling with Shackleton. The small group must now haul the heavy sledges themselves. Trudging through deep snow saps their strength. They make camp at 6,000 feet, and Shackleton decides to lighten their loads. They ditch everything they dare, including spare clothes. Focused on making an unimpeded strike for the pole, Shackleton writes, "We have burnt our boats behind us now." In 3 days, these words will haunt Shackleton as he faces the most difficult decision of his life. After 100 years, Shackleton's whiskey bottles are free of the ice that entombed them. The moment of unveiling has arrived.
Slightly touching, you can see from the scoria dropping down there. We're just getting a little degree of catching. I think I've been so focused on the containers and the external packaging that I haven't actually given a lot of thought to the liquid contents, and that's unmistakably 100-year-old whiskey. A full bottle of whiskey, it's quite incredible.
A dream come true awaits Richard. He heads to the museum lab to collect his hero's whiskey. Waiting for him at the museum is his billionaire boss, Vijay Mallya. Vijay's flown his private jet from India.
Thanks very much indeed.
Shackleton's whiskey has the honor of flying to Scotland in high style. Lizzie surrenders her cherished bottles to Richard.
Yes, it is. Yeah. A lot of love.
A lot of love.
I'm just noting the condition on departure from AHT is as described in the document. The care of the whiskey bottles officially passes over to Richard Patterson of White & Mackay.
For both of them, it's a memorable moment.
Fantastic.
For Richard and the whiskey, it's the start of a long journey home. Shackleton's relentless push south forces the men up onto the polar plateau. At 11,000 feet, the air thins. Altitude takes its toll. Their pace drags. Shackleton thinks ahead to the return journey and cuts rations. With the pole 152 grueling miles away, conditions worsen. Progress slows further. Shackleton recalculates that even with ration cutting, if they reach the pole, they will starve to death on their return. Determination kicks in. He writes, "We must do something more to the south, even though food is going. We must get within 100 miles of the pole." On the 9th of January, 1909, 97 miles from the pole, they plant the British flag. Shackleton is further south than any human has ventured. He blazed the trail that will one day lead to conquering the pole. But he knows it's time to turn around. Shackleton's decision to turn back is often described as one of the wisest in polar exploration. But what type of man, so close to glory, could turn his back on fame and fortune? There's one person alive who's best qualified to answer this. Shackleton's granddaughter, Alexandra.
He could have been the first at the South Pole, but they were all in a very bad way physically. They could have staggered on and died there, but he took the decision to turn back within 97 miles. showed clearly what his priorities were. His priorities were his men, were all defined by our priorities. And he said afterwards to my grandmother, he thought he'd rather have a live donkey than a dead lion. So he made light of it, but it would have been wonderful. It was the Holy Grail to be first at the pole.
Alexander Shackleton's family motto was, and is, by endurance, we conquer. By turning back, the lion-hearted Ernest Shackleton showed his love of living. He wasn't prepared to see anyone die on an attempt to conquer the pole.
He was very decisive. He didn't think, shall I, shan't I? And he knew it was down to him to make the decision, and he made it. He had to bring his men back alive.
Shackleton's whiskey is on the road again.
Okay, it's nearly midnight. We've been on the go for nearly 48 hours. We've got 2 cases containing the 3 bottles. The 3 bottles of Shackleton's whiskey. We're racing now to the airport to get on to Dr. Vijay Mallya's private jet. Very, very precious.
The doors close on the private Airbus 319, and Shackleton's whiskey is cleared for takeoff.
Show 11, runway 27, clips takeoff, winds 250 degrees, 03 knots.
5003, clips takeoff, 70, show 11.
A century after leaving Scotland, the precious cargo is on its way home. Tomorrow, Richard will uncork a bottle and taste the spirit of his dreams. The Antarctic is throwing all it has at Shackleton and his men. They've turned back, but the hut is still a daunting 2 months' march away. Suddenly, Shackleton collapses. A suspected heart attack. The team doctor, Eric Marshall, records a weak, irregular pulse. He writes of Shackleton's critical condition, "I cannot describe adequately the mental and physical strain." But Shackleton summons a hidden strength. Leading by example, he gets back in harness. The worse he feels, the harder he pulls, reports Jameson Adams, one of the men with him. Richard and the whiskey are almost home. Shackleton's whiskey maker could hardly have imagined his bottles on such a lavish flight, 30,000 feet in the air. Still chilled, they will soon be back in Scotland.
Everything's under lock and key. The temperature should have been maintained. I'm exceptionally excited. I'm just delighted that we've got the boxes safely here. Okay, that's it. Officially, Shackleton whiskey is finally home.
The days in Antarctica are shortening as winter approaches and permanent darkness prepares to cloak the continent. It's the end of February 1909, and Shackleton is still many miles from base camp. His ship, the Nimrod, returns. The men who stayed behind reluctantly end their vigil in the hut and move on board. The Nimrod must leave in 2 days to avoid being trapped in the winter pack ice. Shackleton left strict orders for the ship to sail on the 1st of March, with or without him. The Antarctic Explorer's whiskey is back on Scottish soil, but its journey is not over. The distillery lab best equipped for analysis is 190 miles from Glasgow, through the Scottish Highlands. The road north follows the River Spey, whose famous waters feed the many Speyside distilleries that in turn produce the classic Speyside whiskies. Here, centuries of rainfall seep through the volcanic rock, and mists water the peat moors and forests. The sun kisses the wheat and barley grains. The birthplace of Scotch whiskey has barely changed since Shackleton's time. Shackleton and his men are starving. They search out the frozen corpses of the horses they had to slaughter on the outward journey. But eating the tainted meat causes severe dysentery and vomiting. On the 27th of February, Dr. Marshall collapses. Shackleton pushes ahead. He must reach the hut before the Nimrod sails. At 8 p.m. on the last day of February, he makes it back to base camp. The hut is abandoned. He's returned before the deadline, yet the Nimrod is nowhere to be seen. Richard arrives at the distillery's warehouse.
Morning, guys.
Today, Shackleton's spirit finally leaves the bottle. Shackleton's whiskey will be scientifically extracted by research chemist Dr. James Pride and his team.
Okay, Richard, do you want to...
Extraction takes place under a clean air hood, so nothing pollutes the whiskey. The syringe must be precisely inserted.
Right, you see where the dot,
these
see the
two
dot?
dots, right,
Yes.
that's where they've suggested
That's where
we can go in, okay?
Can you feel the glass? Is it moving? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well done, well done. Right. 2 seconds. Can I smell that?
No, give me one of the thinner needles.
That one?
Yeah.
Distilled more than 100 years ago, Shackleton's whiskey is pre-nuclear age. It's the most pristine whiskey ever examined.
Even at this early stage, you can see it's quite light. This is suggesting it's been matured in possibly American white oak. You can see the level quite clear.
Mm-hmm. It's very exciting. Probably hasn't sunk in yet, really, like all these things until after.
When the whiskey samples are out of the bottle, they are scanned for signatures that identify each chemical trace. Minerals in the water, the type of peat fires that dried the malt, the trees that made the wooden casks, all make every whiskey a time capsule that holds secrets. But lines on a graph only say so much. It will take Richard's $1 million nose to reveal Shackleton's true spirit.
So you've got to note it, that's the one that's gone with Richard.
That's A1.
A1 that's gone with Richard.
Okay.
Right, okay.
It's a new day on Antarctica. Shackleton has waited out the night. Steaming toward him is the Nimrod. She docks one last time before the winter pack ice makes it impossible for the ship to pass through. Shackleton's loyal men return to collect the boss. Frank Wilde, Ernest Shackleton, Eric Marshall, and Jameson Adams stand for a photograph aboard the Nimrod. 3 days after the ship found Shackleton and Wilde, the two others, still miles from base camp, were picked up and reunited with their team.
It's all right, but it's just... Right. So the initial reaction is very good, but it's got that lovely ripe gooseberries and that apple pear. It's all there. It's got very fresh fruit. It's very delicate. It's got floral notes, and this is suggesting just from this here that this is an element of Speyside style. It's got that lovely floral, feminine, sensual. It's got that apple, that's pear, and the crushed almonds are just a whisper towards the end, but it's got that lovely ripe pineapple. It's got that lovely oak. American white oak will give it charm, will give it sensuality, and that's exactly what's happening here. There is fresh oak here. There's buttery notes, what we call buttery. There's hints of lemongrass. Lemons are all there. To my mind, this is the most exciting part of my life. I'm seeing a whiskey from the 19th century that's been preserved for over 100 years. That's an honor, that's a privilege. I don't know about you, but... Excellent. Bloody marvellous. Sir Ernest Shackleton, I salute you.
Richard brought Shackleton's whiskey home without incident and tasted the spirit of his dreams. Now, he faces the challenge of his lifetime, blending a flawless replica from existing stocks of scotch. It's a massive task. At any one time, more than 20 million barrels of spirit are maturing in warehouses across Scotland. But hiding out there somewhere are the whiskeys Richard needs to bring Shackleton's spirit back to life. Richard meets with distillery managers to help him sniff out the precise whiskeys for his Shackleton replica blend.
So we've got quite a number of different problems here. We've got to get real complexity to the blend. We've got to have influence from the Highlands, influence to the Speyside whiskies, but then we've got to have that whisper of peat. It mustn't dominate it. That's my problem, Dave.
Richard selects the whiskey barrels he wants to taste by looking at where the wood originally came from and what the barrel contained.
We've got some of the bourbons here. I see we've got some, you know, from Claremont Distiller from Jim Beam, which is good. And then, of course, some of the hogsheads there from the Highland regions. That's going to help.
Each distinctive flavor imparted from the barrel will combine to create a new, balanced blend. One that mirrors Shackleton's choice.
The more complexity that you can give me to show me, that's it. I mean, we've been to quite a number of distilleries already. We've done a number of samplings, but I'm still searching for the right whiskies.
The right balance.
The right balance, exactly. Ah, here's some more. Yeah. These are in very good condition, actually.
Dipping into each barrel, a sample is drawn. Color, smell, and taste will decide which whiskeys make the new blend.
Oh, she's in a bad mood. Dearie me. She needs to go back to bed for, 5, 6 years, I think.
Some whiskeys mature quickly, while others take their time. By adding a little water, Richard wakes up the whiskey and brings out the character.
Magic bit.
Not really what I'm looking for. Oh, yeah, now we're talking.
A chalked cross means it's a chosen one. The contents of this cask will become one of the secret ingredients in Richard's Shackleton replica.
Matches up well.
Right, and the sherry, that lovely tangy crushed almonds, marmalade, spice. Oh.
After 4 months of searching, sniffing, collecting, measuring, and mixing, Richard's successes and failures deliver a whiskey blend that he believes does justice to Shackleton's original. His first taster is no ordinary guinea pig.
Well, the whiskey linked to Shackleton is a unique connection because you taste what he tasted.
Yes.
Now, I've never visited a distillery before, and I feel this is really a family connection.
Well, yes, but what we're going to do tonight is actually...
Before Alexandra is allowed a dram, Richard shows her how little the process has changed since her grandfather's whiskey was distilled 100 years ago.
So, Alexandra, this is the mash tun.
Oh.
You can see all that. And what it's going to do is it's going to take the barley. It's lovely, full of starch. And now what we want to do, we want to mash it up and extract the natural sugars. Then we're going to cool it, and then we're going to ferment it.
To ferment the mashed grain, the final ingredient is added.
All right, here we go. And this is it here, Alexandra, look.
Good gracious.
Yeah,
looks absolutely astonishing.
This is the actual fermentation taking place.
Like hot springs in New Zealand.
Exactly what it's like.
Yeah,
it's very violent. It's frothing up. The yeast is attacking the sugar, looking for the sugar, going to convert it into alcohol.
That's amazing.
Beautiful. Once it subsides, spirit is then taken, and then we go to the distillation stage.
Right.
So that goes next door.
At the distillation stage, the alcoholic soup is boiled in copper tanks called stills. Here, it becomes a clear spirit that eventually matures into scotch. Richard's replica of Shackleton's blend is a fusion of 25 mature whiskeys. Now, its time has come.
What I want you to do is swirl it around, bring it up and say, hello. And as soon as you say hello, really get into it. Really put it right into the nose like this. Just into the side, move it from one side to the other, and you'll see immediately that softness, that elegance. So when you take a big mouthful, put it down, hold it there, hold it there. And as soon as you swallow, take a big deep breath, big kick of the alcohol. Right there. Now wait for it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Explodes in your mouth.
Amazing.
You can see the peat.
Wonderful.
47.3%, the peat, the level, and this is what it's all about. So this is the style. This is what the spirit of your grandfather is in this.
This is incredible. Incredible. I've never tasted anything like this. It's of the past and of the present.
Yes.
Thanks to your genius in recreating it. We will.
Slanjiva.
Rarely does a relic sum up an age, but Shackleton's whiskey embodies the strength and style of a man and an era. Shackleton recovers from his remarkable Nimrod expedition and returns home a hero. Despite the dangers, can't resist the lure of the ice and snow. His next expedition south, on the Endurance, includes the most heroic rescue in polar history. Sir Ernest Shackleton is buried here on South Georgia, close to his beloved Antarctica. In more ways than one, Shackleton's spirit lives on.